Now, I thought, as I'm here on a beach in North Wales, it would be a wonderful time to share a story about Taliesin, my old mate, and the greatest bard that Britain has ever known. You see, we owe so much to the bards. They were the keepers of the stories for all the ancient British tribes, and if it wasn't for the songs they sung, celebrating great battles and daring do, maybe Britain wouldn't have any stories to tell at all, and there'd be hardly any tales of Britain, which is a tragedy, I'm sure you're going to agree. Anyway, we all celebrate, what's his name? William Shakespeare, of course, the Bard of Avon, as they call him, as the nation's greatest poet. But by far the greatest bard of ancient times was a clever chap known as Taliesin. His power with verse was so strong, he was said to have been a valued friend to a whole host of British kings, including maybe King Arthur, certainly Bran the Blessed, Pryderi, and others. But his beginnings were far more humble. The bard's real name, you see, was Gwion Bach, or Little Gwion, and he was a lowly lad in service to a great enchanter named Ceridwen, who lived in Lake Bala in Snowdonia. There's a whole other story. She was married, sadly, to a nasty old git called Tegid Foel, and he had a castle down there. And she was wed to him, and she gave birth to 2 children, a boy and a girl. Her daughter Crewu, was as clever and charming as she was beautiful. But sadly, the same could not be said of Crewu's little brother Morfran, and folk cruelly laughed that he looked like a plucked crow. This wouldn't have mattered so much had the boy been gifted with brains to make up for it, but his mother also had to admit that he had the intelligence of a mound of sheep poo. Luckily, being a witch, Ceridwen knew what to do. She got out her magic cauldron and put in all the ingredients of a special potion. Newt's noses, ferret's eyebrows, tomatoes, that sort of thing, which would eventually confer everlasting wisdom on anyone who drank the first 3 drops. However, all the rest of the brew would be poison. The potion needed to be stirred almost constantly for a year and a day, and of course the job fell to wee Gwion, while the fire beneath was tended by an old blind man with nothing better to do. This was exhausting work for the servant boy, but he did as he was told until the recipe was finally ready. Sadly, at just that moment, 3 drops splashed out of the cauldron onto Gwion's hand, and he squealed in pain. Just as he put his hand to his mouth to stop the burning, suddenly Gwion felt enormous wisdom spreading from his fingers up his arms and throughout his body, resting, of course, in his brain, which suddenly pulsated with a very clear and important wisdom. That wisdom was that the very powerful and very, very, very annoyed Ceridwen would kill him when she found out what had happened. Fortunately, the lad's newfound cleverness also had the added bonus of allowing him to change shape at will, and so he tore off in the shape of a hare, desperate to get as far away from his boss as possible. But Ceridwen was born clever, and she quickly took off in hot pursuit in the shape of a hound. This is an old chestnut, really, the 2 wizards chasing each other as different animals, but this is the textbook example. The chase went on. The boy turned into a salmon and leapt into the lake, but there was the angry enchanter in the shape of an otter, hot on his fins. Then he flew up into the air as a sparrow, but Ceridwen the sparrowhawk soon had him in her sights. Finally, exhausted, little Gwion tried to hide as an ear of corn, and his employer gobbled him up in the shape of a big black hen. You'd naturally expect that to be the end of poor Gwion. Very few people turn into an ear of corn, get eaten, and live to tell the tale. But all that new-found wisdom could not just die so easily, and so he began to grow anew within Ceridwen, whose belly was soon swollen with the servant she wanted dead. However, when the baby was born 9 months later, and instantly began to sing so sweetly about how blue the sky was, and how green the grass, and how white the sheep, even the mighty Ceridwen could not bear to do him any harm. And so the great sorcerer queen placed the baby in a leather coracle, a sort of round boat, and set him out to sea, where the fates could deal with him as they might. Before too dampeningly long, the coracle washed up on a briny beach a little further south from here, near Ardudwy, and was soon discovered as a sheer stroke of unusual luck by a nice enough young British aristocrat called Prince Elfin Gwithno the Unlucky. He had been dubbed unlucky when all his inheritance in the green pastures of Cantref Gwaelod had disappeared under the waves of the Irish Sea, thanks to some drunken prince who forgot to close the sluice gates, so he heard. So Elfin lived frugally for a prince, a simple soul just trying to look on the bright side of life and spread a little sweetness and light. But since the end of his bachelor days, he having recently plighted his troth to a lovely damsel called Gladys, he had decided a little extra cash would be a very welcome thing indeed. And so he was hoping to see if any of his inheritance had washed up anywhere on the shore, and he had his little fishing rod out and all sorts. "And I say, what is this I find?" Elfin mused to himself. "Nothing but an old leathery buoy or some such." It was then that young Taliesin vaulted out of the coracle and gave a deep, respectful bow to the prince. Transformed once again, Taliesin was now a tall, dark Johnny in a long black cape, and had such a bulging brain under his sizable forehead, it seemed to glow with a kind of wisdom, that the first thing that Prince Elfin said as he beheld this stranger on the shore was, "Radiant brow," which in his dialect sounded like Taliesin, hence the name. "Not a boy, but a boyo, what? Ha ha ha! Hello, I'm Prince Elfin Gwithno, the Unlucky." "Taliesin, I am, sir, indeed. May I be of any service? I am a fully trained servant, and if you will forgive me for saying so, sir, I feel I have it in me to be something of an inspirational bard, given the right audience." "Gosh, really? Well, fire away then." And Taliesin sang. Now, look, I can't try and recreate the sheer majesty and magic of what Taliesin sang and how he sang, so I'm just going to have to do my best. And so, Taliesin sang. "Dear Elfin, dry your eyes, let no one be dissatisfied with his own. To despair brings no advantage, no man sees what supports him. I am the one who will sing of your fame. My songs will be heard in the fort-turret fort. Forever to come, folk will know well your name, and bring you an afterlife not to be bored. Although I am but little, I am highly gifted, weak and small as I am. From seas and from mountains, from the depths of rivers, on the foaming beach of the ocean, there lies a virtue in my tongue. In the day of trouble, I shall be of more service to thee than 300 salmon. Yeah. Elfin of notable qualities, be not displeased at thy misfortune, while I continue thy protector. Thou hast not much to fear. Cha-cha-cha. I say, well, it didn't always rhyme, of course, but yes, I jolly well enjoyed that. One problem, though, Taliesin, you seem quite the brain box, but perhaps you missed the unlucky bit earlier. I can't exactly offer you a competitive salary. It would be an honour to serve, sir. And as I sang, I feel that I may be able to steer you towards a way of life far more befitting one of your noble blood. Besides my outlined resume, I have also picked up a number of surprising tricks from my former employer. And so Prince Elfin took Taliesin home with him, and in no time was marvelling that he had ever managed to survive from day to day without Taliesin's incredible skills, wise guidance, and toe-tapping prophesying. But then, as so often used to happen to poor old Elfin, just as everything seemed to be going along nicely, he found himself plunged into the soup. There, on his breakfast table one morning, lay an invitation, and it was one he would be utterly unable to turn down. It was from his horrible uncle, King Maelgwyn Gwynedd. "You know of him, of course?" Elfin asked Taliesin. "Naturally, sir, he is the King of Gwynedd. I am given to understand that he is something of a of a large virile personage. You spoke an absolute gobful there, Taliesin. King Maelgwyn is built like Cormoran the Giant's big brother, and he's always taken particular pleasure in making my life an absolute misery. But when he calls, off I must bustle. At least his castle at Deganwy is home to the race of the season. Do you go in much for the GGs, Taliesin? Indeed I do, sir. I am a keen scholar of the turf. I shall commence packing for the visit, sir. Just the two of us, I think, Taliesin. I wouldn't trust dirty old Uncle Maelgwyn anywhere near my Gladys. And so Taliesin and Elfin rode forth to the heart of Gwynedd, where Taliesin had to raise an eyebrow at the sight of the enormous despot King Maelgwyn, who was built like a couple of leather sofas stitched into a king costume. His main seat of power was up in Anglesey at Aberfraw, but this was his large country home at Deganwy. That night, at the great feast, it was the turn of both of Elfin's eyebrows to shoot up at the sight of the king's harem of wives. "Are you looking at my birds, Elfin?" demanded the irascible king. "You keep goggling like that, my boy, and I shall be forced to punch your kidneys right up through your nostrils, you penniless worm. Each of my wives is the finest beauty of her tribe, just as my bards are the finest singers and seers of all realms. I only invited you here so I could enjoy scoffing at how little you have and how much I have. It's your one use to me." It may be true that poor Elfin had enjoyed perhaps one beaker of mead too many, as he then dared to observe, "Well, your 10 wives and however many bards are no doubt absolute corkers, your majesty, uncle. But you know, my dear partner in wedded bliss, Princess Gladys, is an absolute 10 out of 10 pippin of a girl. Hot stuff, to say the least, but utterly devoted to me, bless her. And, for that matter, my own bard, Taliesin, is no great slouch at the old prophetical poetizing, singing and all that rot, you know. I'm jolly happy with what I have." "You are you, you mollusk? Well, we'll soon see about that." When his employer repeated the threats the king had made, Taliesin swung into action. Taking his favoured form of a little green bird, he observed the king's rotten son, Rune, stampeding off to Elfin's home, where he was obviously intending some sneaky test of Gladys's virtue. Speeding ahead on the wing, Taliesin explained the situation to his mistress, and urged her, "Whatever you do, madam, do not allow yourself to be alone in the company of Prince Rune. He intends no good to you nor your house. I would suggest bamboozling him with an impostor, someone who could be disguised as you." "Oh, Nanny will be up for that," Gladys cried. "She'll do anything for me, dear old dear, and I lend her my finest gown for the evening." And so, when the son of the king arrived, all was arranged, and he was left alone with the poor disguised old Nanny, thinking, "Well, old unlucky face was lying about her beauty for a start." And then, even worse, once he had plied the poor old woman with booze, the psychopathic prince cut off her little finger, which bore Gladys's wedding ring. He wrapped the finger up, rode home, and presented it to his hooting father. "Not exactly the paragon of virtue and beauty you are claiming, eh, Elfin?" Prince Elfin examined the finger. "Oh, gosh, well, this isn't one of Gladys's fingers at all. No, Uncle Maelgwyn. Some kind of mix-up, clearly. I remember all her fingers very distinctly. This is some old wrinkly finger you've got here, Uncle. No, sorry about that." Taliesin had to roll his eyes when he heard his employer ruining his whole plan, standing there by his master's side, knowing that the king was now liable to become apoplectic. "Now listen here, you unlucky dweeb. We of true royal blood do not make mistakes. Guards, take this miserable beetle down to the dungeons. I'll decide what to do with him after the Eisteddfod." The Welsh Eisteddfod was a kind of vast talent show, with numerous bards all joining together to share stories, poems, prophecies, philosophies, and songs, often in communion. All bards connecting through the creative spirit of the Arwen. But not on this occasion. Right, so little Elfin says his bard is the best in Britain, eh? Roared King Maelgwyn. Well, we'll see how this so-called Taliesin holds his own against the finest bards of all lands, men of wit, wisdom, and second sight I have brought to my court from every corner of the island to be my personal entertainers. Mervyn, the muser, let you be the one to open this evening's barrage of intellectual stimulation. The tall, beardy bard took his place centre stage, all the court around him, smiled at the crowd, strummed his lyre, and then went... His fingers lifted unstoppably to his lips, and he wibbled them. Wibble! He repeated. Are you taking the royal piddle? Thundered the king, and sent poor Mervyn off to the dungeons with a wave of his enormous hand. Montmorency of Talibont, yes, you take his place. Show this stripling what a real bard can do. But the second bard did the same thing as the first. And the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and so on and so on and so on, all through the court, every bard. Of course, Taliesin knew just the right recipe to slip into the other bard's wine to get this desired effect. But nobody there would ever believe such a thing was possible. And so it became Taliesin's turn to sing. And so Taliesin sang. You are blundering bards, you cannot celebrate the kingdom of the Britons. And I am Taliesin, chief of the bards of the West. Much better, who will loosen Elfin out of the golden fetter. Be silent then, ye unlucky rhyming bards, for you cannot judge between truth and a falsehood. It is I who am a diviner and a leading bard, and know every passage in the country of your king. A most strange creature will come from the sea marsh of Rhianneth as a punishment on the iniquity of Maelgwyn Gwyneth, his hair, his teeth, and his eyes being as gold. And this will bring destruction. This will bring destruction. This will bring destruction on you all. At these words, King Maelgwyn was just about to roar a murderous sentence upon brave Taliesin's rather large head. But suddenly, an almighty wind suddenly sprang up, seemingly at the great bard's insistence, and blew bards, wives, and above all King Maelgwyn flying out into the cold and very drizzly swamps of Gwyneth, as the walls of the castle began to crumble in upon themselves, leaving a handy crater for poor Prince Elfin to climb out of, dusting himself down. Good heavens, Taliesin, I had no idea you had it in you. Well, that all seems well that ends well, what? Except I've been in that dungeon for so long, I must have missed the horse race. And I had an absolute belter of a dead cert too. I wanted to put what remains of the family silver on Hobbledyhoof to win the 330. If I may say so, sir, I would not have recommended such an action had you informed me. Hobbledyhoof romped home in last place. But I did take the liberty of placing the entirety of your finances on a horse called Birdbrain, a fine stallion in my eyes, who, with the aid of a certain sprig of holly tied to its tail, romped home in first place with a very competitive rate of 25 to 1. I have your winnings here, sir. Now, Prince Elfin was known as a bit of a goggler, but never had that prince goggled as he goggled at that time, as the enormous cauldron appeared before him, filled with gold and silver and all the jewels and everything that Taliesin had won for him on that day. Taliesin, you are a marvel. What a brain! I suppose it must be all that fish you eat. How very lucky I am." Taliesin actually smiled. "I endeavour to give satisfaction, sir," he said. And so, with clever Taliesin by his side, Elphin was never unlucky again, and he won many wagers and horse races by following the young bard's advice, and ended up with a bigger castle than his horrible old uncle ever had. That's a nice end to the legend of Elphin, isn't it? There are other versions of the legend. I wouldn't look them up. They're not very... It's a bit... Anyway, eventually, when Taliesin reached a certain age, he took his leave and began to travel the land, singing his songs and telling his tales, and performing services for the greatest kings of all time. He was an award-winning war reporter for the horrendous carnage at Cattraeth, one of the greatest bloodbaths wrought by the Saxon armies up north somewhere. And he even befriended old Merlin the Wild, alleged grandson, or maybe son, of the Merlin, Merlin Emeris, Arthur's mate that we know so much about. He was a fellow bard who had fled from the horrors of the battle and hidden in the woods, refusing to come out. Together, the two brain boxes philosophized and prophesied, and their Dark Age musings are still in print to this very day. I mean, I wish I could say the same. That's impressive stuff. Well done, Taliesin. Anyway, above all, Taliesin never had to turn into any animal, vegetable, or mineral ever again. Unless he really felt like it, you know. But to this day, folksters and rhymers follow in Taliesin's footsteps, myself included, and they call themselves bards, continuing the tradition of storytelling and singing. And they still get together every year at Welsh festivals, still called Eisteddfods, all over the country. And when they do, you can be sure that a lot more than a wibble or will be said in celebration of our hero. And many glasses will be raised to the memory of clever old Taliesin, the greatest bard that Britain ever had. The end. Now, I'm off for a paddle.